Hello, looks like we are live. Looks like I've avoided the problem that happened last time, which was being on the VPN, just killing the stream. So, no one here yet, but we had a few people who expressed interest, so I'm just going to get started. So, we're here to talk about the UFO study or the UAP report, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. It's an interesting subject, and there's an opportunity there in it to talk about a lot of different parts of the way NASA works and the way the federal government works and even the way the aerospace engineering and science works in general. I think that the place to start is that these kinds of press conferences and reports and meetings, this is the way the U.S. government kind of communicates in formal documents and summaries of those documents. And so when the government is feeling sufficient pressure that it has to do something to answer some big question, there'll be some kind of meeting gathering some experts, and it will be communicated with a report. Now, this subject is particularly unusual and difficult to describe in a report. So there's some meetings about it, public presentations about it, and it's really an interesting question for something that is so out there among topics that governments deal with, unidentified aerial phenomena or anomalous phenomena. It's one of those things that's not even clear in the U.S. government whose responsibility it is, and most agencies really are not looking for more responsibilities. So even if something were to fall into an agency's orbit, no pun intended, it's not obvious who would be responsible for this. And as we'll see from some of these presentations, there's a lot of different ways to look at this question, from national security, aviation safety, and of course, space. Possible extraterrestrial origins of certain things, whether they're spacecraft or rocks or what have you. And this subject in particular, I mean, you really have to approach it with the greatest possible skepticism. I worked for NASA for 10 years. I worked on life detection mission concepts. There are two people on Earth, maybe three, who I would need to hear from to believe or accept the report that extraterrestrial life exists. Two or three people. Now, I don't have the scientific training to look at the data myself and come to that conclusion. Plenty of people do, but these three people I would trust if they said, yes, this life form is not from the Earth, that I would trust in their expertise. And that's really only because I know them personally. There are plenty of biologists and even astrobiologists who could come to that conclusion, but it is such a hey John, it is such a enormous subject that I really it will be very difficult for me to accept an extraterrestrial source of any life, as much as I would love to. So, John, I was just talking about this approach that the government is taking here on having a meeting and filing a report. I'm sure, as you well know, the government speaks in reports, and this subject, in theory, being so sensitive, no one really wants to talk about it in the government because the military is not in the business of discussing threats to national security openly. NASA, as much as it would seem obvious that NASA would be interested in talking about subjects like this, it's not really NASA's job to either. So it's pretty remarkable that anything like this actually happened. I'm positive that whatever is ever being released to the public is a very small version of what was observed and reported in the military and possibly in some aviation circles. Not that I think there's a smoking gun alien spacecraft evidence, but the public reporting on this is going to be uniquely the three people. Hey, Colton. Oh, sure, yeah, the three people that I would trust. Basically, there are astrobiologists that I worked with. You can look them up. David Grinspoon, Morgan Cable, and Lauren White. And they're leading astrobiologists, but I happen to work with them, and they taught me a lot. So if they told me that yes, this evidence confirms that this life form did not originate on the Earth, then I would believe that. Anyway, so the government, nobody really wants to take this position. I don't even think anyone at NASA does. This would be the biggest news in human history, and whoever makes that announcement someday, hopefully I live to see it. Whoever makes that announcement someday is going to be subject to the greatest criticism and the highest scrutiny, possibly of anyone ever. And we couldn't even agree that COVID was bad. So whoever gets up on the government stage and says aliens are real, or at least this life form is clearly not from the Earth, even if it's like a bacteria, well, that person is going to have a lot of email and DMs pretty quickly. But anyway, so government speaks and reports, and this is a summary. What we're about to look at is a summary of a meeting about a report that's coming out. And if that sounds convoluted, welcome to the U.S. government. You have summaries of meetings about reports, about committees, and it's just as, it's a rabbit hole. But there are some things we can take from this. So what I'm going to do is go through this report, read between the lines with you, and kind of share what I think about the subject. And, really, short of an alien spaceship landing on my front lawn and me seeing it with my own eyes, it would take something like that for me to believe it. Although even that, I would want to confirm that somehow I was not being, my mind was not somehow being manipulated, because that's more likely than aliens landing in my front yard. So again, I want all this stuff to be true, but you have to approach this with the greatest skepticism. So there is an agenda for this meeting. So basically, Congress asked NASA to basically put together some kind of conference. It starts with Congress, some kind of event, some kind of team to study this, probably just to satisfy the public, or rather to respond, to be shown to do something about this very strange series of questions that Americans have. So they called this NASA put together this team. I actually worked with some of the people on it, Nikki Fox here, and so there's reports here from a military perspective, an aviation safety perspective, and a NASA perspective. And the spoiler is that this is a meeting about future meetings. These are reports about future investigations, and that's just how it is. It's almost, even if this stuff was aliens, this is not the form it would be reported to the public. So this is just sort of government sausage making. But so we can look at some of these documents. Media advisory, yeah, okay. Provides coverage of meeting. So again, it's a committee about a report about a meeting about a, team. So not much there. This one starts to get interesting. It's from the military perspective. Department of Defense and the UAP mission, unidentified aerial phenomena. So it's interesting to see the way these different agencies provided input into this team. So we'll start with the DoD, and then aviation, and then NASA. So what you have here is reporting trends about 27 years worth of various reports of things in the sky. Now, you have to start with the realization that most pilots are not going to report things that they don't understand. This has been true since Apollo, and probably as early as humans were flying 100 years ago. But pilots really don't want to be seen as seeing things, and so they don't always report stuff. But here are some reports. I think there were 800 total in the DoD. You have a chart here of at different altitudes. So 10% were at 5,000 feet. The most were at 20,000 feet, which is interesting. And you've got some graphics for commercial air traffic, weather balloons. Now at around 60,000 feet, 80,000 feet, you've got various military aircraft that even I know about, so they can't be that secret. So I imagine those reports from secret, or rather, they weren't secret, reports from certain military missions are not going to be added to a public report. So who knows? But this is a striking number that at 20,000 feet, there's a large number of reports. Now that I'm no aviation expert, but what I do know is that you're below the clouds there. You're below the highest usual cloud layer. So you've got all kinds of weather up there. That doesn't mean you didn't see anything else, but there are all kinds of weird weather that create flashing, very strange looking things. Like ball lightning is a weird thing. Look up ball lightning sometime, or red sprites. Sometimes lightning appears to be a little red shape in the clouds. I can't remember the mechanism, but there's all kinds of weird lightning up there. Again, I don't mean to like discourage to sort of dispel the fantasy that any of this could actually be real alien stuff, but I'm just sharing what I know. So, okay, so the things are usually round, 1 to 4 meters wide, white, silver, translucent, kind of like a cloud. Like we saw here, roughly 10 to 30,000 feet. Velocity stationary to Mach 2. Stationary object. I'm obviously not a pilot, but I have always found it hard to tell the relative speeds of things in the sky because you don't have a lot of landmarks usually. So I find that really interesting. Propulsion, no thermal exhaust detected. That means some kind of infrared sensor was pointed at the object. And no heat was measured. Now, in every method of propulsion we have produces a lot of heat. So it's pretty weird that no heat has been measured in these things. Radar, what that means is what signals, or what radar was used to observe these things. Basically, what wavelengths of light were shined at the object. And here comes the cat. Always enjoys these lives. So what kinds of radar were pointed at the thing? Now, when it says radio, I assume that means attempted radio frequencies to communicate. And, or either that or sources from the object. Now, everything in the universe emits some kind of electromagnetic wave, at a minimum thermal. And this is not saying that these things did not emit any thermal energy. It just means not like a signature of propulsion. I mean, if we saw an object that had no black body radiation, which is the bare minimum radiation of any object in the universe, that would be pretty wild. But you couldn't measure that in the atmosphere anyway. And then thermal. So I imagine this means we might have more details later in the methodologies, but basically they use whatever else the military used to look at these things. They're not going to tell us about. So this is what we've got. I'm particularly curious as to what wavelengths this thing is emitting, or what wavelengths are measured coming from the objects, particularly because lightning emits a huge amount of electromagnetic energy at very high wavelengths. I mean, probably much higher than this, but can't always be measured because, again, it's so high wavelength. And it's sort of like looking at the sun, which has all the wavelengths getting blasted out, and you need special equipment to see anything other than a bunch of noise. So, and again, not all of this is going to be reported in a 10-slide presentation. Why isn't black body radiation measurable in the atmosphere? Because the air is the molecules of air themselves have much more thermal energy than the vacuum. So, like, it's there. If you look at a cloud, you're going to see it, but it's much higher. Just the energy of a water molecule floating in the sky is going to be 1,000,000 times higher than its black body radiation. So it's not that you don't see it; it's just that you can't separate it from the actual object. So to measure that, you typically have to isolate it in a vacuum, and it's very difficult and expensive. So this was an interesting bit of reporting here. This map. So when I see this, I see the hot spots not being very high or low latitude. Now, so what does that mean? The weather is more, on average, is more intense at central latitude. So, this subject being such a out there one, I have to think of ways to eliminate the possibility of alien life, which is a fun thing. It's a wild thing to even be talking about. So I guess we've got some examples: unresolved spherical UAP via electro-optical sensors. So basically, they looked at it with different wavelengths and maybe broadcast some radio to it, some radio signals. But basically, you've got a photo and something that cannot be identified. So it sure looks like a metal orb. No demonstration of technical capabilities or apparent threat. So who knows? There's probably a much deeper report on this thing that obviously we don't have. Another one, 3 UAPs observed apparently flying at high velocity. Observing craft pursuit was unable to intercept. Some photos, actually. Changes of shape. Air traffic control data suggested commercial aircraft. Still under study. I don't expect that I would have any insights greater than this team, obviously, or the people that provided this information. But there are a lot of interesting. There's a lot of interesting work showing just how convincing light reflections inside camera optics can be. So if you have an advanced camera with actual mirrors, not like a phone camera, there is a huge amount of light reflecting around inside that thing, and for decades that was a major challenge in aviation photography. So again, I really would love this to be true, but I have to think of ways that it isn't. So basically, comparing signatures of what they've seen to different types of objects, and we know about a lot of stuff flying up there, and we can compare signals, to the signals of things we know, but obviously it's not. There's still things we don't understand. So here's the point of this report from the DoD group. Recommendations for NASA. What you'll find interesting here is the military is saying NASA should do this, NASA should do that. In other words, we don't want to do this, and that's not surprising. I mean, DoD is already tracking hundreds and hundreds of objects. DoD is actually responsible for making sure, for almost all satellite collision avoidance. And the reason is that if it wasn't responsible for that, they'd have to share their secret satellites with other people, which they don't want to do. So they, over the decades, ended up, if you have a satellite that's going to collide, you'll get a phone call or some kind of communication. They're going to say, hey, you should do this. And you'll say, why? And they'll say, no, you don't ask questions. Do this. Because they're not going to tell you what you might be hitting. They're not going to tell you about their satellites. So this report, or this recommendation is always NASA do this and this. And none of it is terribly surprising. Use reports from the public, use ground-based telescopes, do this in a scientific context, use the Earth-sensing satellites. This is fun. Peer-reviewed, basically, like what could lead the elevation of a scientific discourse on what potential form of advanced flight would take on Earth and what signatures would be presented. In other words, what technologies does the universe permit that we don't have yet? But what would they look like? So I've done some work in that area, and it's really fun. But of course, that's like saying, hey, if a warp drive was real, how would we detect it? And NASA, a lot of people at NASA would love to do that kind of work, but as I discussed in one of my other lives, it's very hard to get approval and funding to do that. So this is kind of similar to in the 90s when, around the time Armageddon and Deep Impact came out, NASA was given the responsibility of, I'm not making this up, of tracking every single asteroid or meteor, every single asteroid in the solar system. It's like billions of objects. And they went from Congress, and went to Congress and says, okay, we're going to need $9 billion a year to do this. And the Congress is like, oh, you misunderstood. We're not giving you any more money. We just want you to we just want you to catalog every single object in the solar system. So this is the government at work. And they did a good job. That NASA reorganized some things and took that as a priority. But government agencies don't want to be given orders. They want to be given budgets. So moving on. So that's the DoD perspective. I think this is the aviation one. So this is interesting, the FAA, and you'll see a totally different tone here, which is not surprising. And having worked with the federal government for many years, it's I almost don't even think to mention it, but the different agencies are very different animals with different goals and priorities, and you'll see that as we go through these different recommendations. So here's a summary. I'm sure this slide is on every single FAA presentation ever given, and probably out of date. Basically, look what we do. Huge amounts of land and sea, of course. And what did they do? 16 million flights a day, 5,000 aircraft in the sky at peak time. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I'm not minimizing or dismissing all of this. It's just I've seen so many slide decks that you kind of get a fatigue about them. And of course, it's really, it's very important and interesting work. So the first slide of substance here is really different approaches to surveillance, to looking at stuff. Do you have a system on board that's going to respond when you ping it or not? So that's all we're talking about. It's important to note that sometimes a spacecraft doesn't talk back. I mean, an aircraft doesn't talk back because it has a damaged electronic system. But this is really setting up the discussion of how does the FAA track things we don't know about, and different types of sensors. Kind of interesting, but this I thought was much more interesting. This map. So basically, you have the continental U.S. and you have coverage maps of radar line of sight, meaning pointing a radar at something and shining reflecting light off of it and measuring something. And as you might imagine, that changes at different altitudes. So at 1,000 feet above the ground, you have this kind of coverage, and 2,000 feet it's different, and there's different types of coverage, non-cooperative and cooperative, which is going back up here, depending on whether the thing is responding back actively or not, meaning whether it receives your signal and broadcasts its own, or that's cooperative, or non-cooperative, which is when you send a signal and it bounces off the thing the way physics says it's going to, and then you can measure something. So lots of radar systems around the country. Interestingly, this is Madison, Wisconsin, right here where I live. So that must be at the airport where they have the F-35s now. So, wow, almost nothing in South Dakota, just one. Or, you know what? What am I saying? I know there's bases in South Dakota. There must be secret ones there that are not on this map. Oh, this is FAA, not military. Anyway, I do believe that there would only be one FAA station. There must be tons of military stuff. Because in the Cold War, the U.S. built a bunch of aviation military equipment around here to track Russian stuff coming over Alaska. Anyway, tangent. So you can see that the FAA has its own widely varying radar coverage of the skies at different altitudes. And ADS-B, I believe that's the automatic transmission systems that commercial aircraft use. So the idea being that if they want to see what something is, they point something at it, and it should do several things. It should respond actively with its own broadcast, and the signature that you get from it should match something that we know. So you point the thing at a aircraft going by, you should recognize everything that comes back. You should say, oh, well, that's a signal from the aircraft, and the radar should produce a signature that looks like a type of aircraft that we understand. So you can imagine if you don't get either of those back from something moving in the sky, well, you get very curious. So that's the end of this. This is not even, doesn't even show the results of the FAA reporting, but it shows you what they're capable of doing. So now we have a team. We have a speech, basically. You don't usually get the whole text of the speech, but this is from Nikki. And most of it is what a great team, what a privilege, blah blah blah. There's a big disclaimer about limited number of high quality observations, lots of things. These things could be classified data from civilian government agencies. Talking about the methodology, that there are There's a good reason to use unclassified because then you can actually you do science, peer-reviewed science on it. The sensors themselves could be classified, but the image itself it may not be. So that was sort of introductory remarks. She also talks about, or maybe someone else does, talks about how when this team was put together, a lot of them actually got a lot of hate online, which is really unfortunate. Kind of, a lot of people in the U.S. don't see the value in space exploration on a good day of normal stuff, and certainly would dismiss any possible value of studying unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, in a previous live, I talked about how NASA does have about 1% of its budget that goes to Star Trek type stuff. And that seems like the right amount, as much as I wish it were more. I mean, you need to do some work on high risk, low probability of success, but high impact work. And likewise, it makes sense that there be a small effort into studying these things, however likely it is that they are just totally benign. So, all right, we got another speech, and more of the same. It's situational awareness, important, and use evidence, blah, 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 transparency. I guess that started with this, so I kind of jumped into the presentations. This was the same thing. And that takes us to this, which is a NASA, a National Academy's report about this effort. It's sandwiched in with a bunch of other stuff, so I already had it open. But like I was saying, high risk, high impact phenomena. So, by the way, the National Academies heavily advises NASA on what scientific priorities to pursue. So, usually that's like, where did the gas come from on Jupiter, or is there water on Mars? But having the National Academies direct NASA to do this with Congress kind of adds credibility and a sort of institutional stamp of approval to the study. So there's some introductory stuff here. Study these things from a scientific perspective, and again, that is distinct from a military situational awareness or an aviation safety perspective, which may seem obvious, but the government, it's meaningful to call these different things out. And certain people might look at this and kind of focus in on certain words, like a handful appeared to demonstrate advanced technology. Oh, that means NASA people think there's alien spaceships. Well, frankly, I find that sentence to be poorly written. I would have said a handful appear to demonstrate unknown. A handful of them are observations of some are associated with unknown physical phenomena or something, because to use the word technology there suggests that it's a machine when it may not be. So I'm surprised they wrote that like that. But no, I would not jump on that and say, oh, that means that someone slipped. It's actually aliens. So these were kind of points of the goals of the study. NASA, this is a pretty empty sentence. NASA believes the tools of scientific discovery are powerful and apply to the study. Of course they do. They apply to everything. So, yeah, really not a lot of... Oh, I know what's happening. One cat's locked in, one cat's locked out. That's what the sound is about. So that takes us to the end of the available information now. I mean, you could watch the teleconference that presented all of this stuff. But really the conclusion I think to be made here is that this team was put together to build a credible mechanism by which experts in the U.S. government could study and report on this stuff. And you could make the argument that didn't even need to happen. They should have just done it. But it's likely that they held this teleconference to soften the landing of the report, which may well say, there's a bunch of stuff we don't know what it is. I really doubt there's going to be any real mind blowing stuff in the report like this thing can only be explained as a vehicle that is beyond human capabilities. Even if that was someone's conclusion, it's not coming out in a report like this because it would need to be studied. It would need to be evaluated in a peer-reviewed setting. So that's really what we're talking about here, and I wanted to go over it because it's obviously a fascinating subject, but also it highlights a lot of the ways the U.S. government works together well and doesn't, and the way NASA gets involved in these kind of public interest subjects. So happy to take questions. I'll think of other kind of angles to connect this to, but any questions? Well, while you all are thinking of questions, is it a weather balloon? I mean, weather balloons are often. Let me see if I can find a photo. I think a lot of these things, if they were weather balloons, they would be easily identified as such because weather balloons are well, they're either like this or they're silvery coated. Well, this is a really old one. But they're easily identifiable. Yeah, I think that's the logical place to start. But the reason I think it may be more complicated than that is because weather balloons are not secret. So it should be relatively simple to say, we saw something here, it looked like this. Oh, that was a weather balloon. Here's the public record of that. So I imagine some of them are weather balloons or unreported or perhaps misreported so that when someone goes to rule that out, they don't find it. They don't find the record. I mean, every single NOAA weather station launches 2 weather balloons every single day. That's thousands a day into the sky from from their weather stations and facilities. And they're giant balloons that bring up radios and other sensors. And then eventually they pop and someone goes out and tries to get them. So that's thousands of balloons a day, every single day for the last 40 years at least. So you would think that if these unidentified things were all weather balloons, then you ought to be able to rule that out. You ought to be able to determine that from public records and rule it out. Curious that NOAA was not on this team, actually, being the people who launched thousands of giant balloons into the sky. But that's the U.S. government for you. So I've seen these things be released. It's pretty cool, but that would be the right size. But so I don't know. I imagine that could explain some of them. And again, sometimes you don't have consistent observations. You might have a guy on a farm seeing something in the sky and reporting that. You might have a fighter jet reporting something with his or her sensors that's far more sophisticated, reporting something else. In the middle, you might have the FAA, you might have a commercial pilot reporting something. So it's an unknown situation. It's very hard to even compare it's very hard to compare any two reports like this because there's so many variables. I suppose you could classify them and reduce some of those variables, but I don't know that you're ever gonna confirm what all of them are, and particularly in the ones where there's multiple objects moving as a group. I mean, that gets even weirder. Like, what is that? It does say likely commercial airliners I mean, maybe. You'd think you'd see the wings. Video autofocus effects, that seems to be more likely to me because there's just so many different camera technologies that there's a lot of reflections inside. So what's my takeaway? My takeaway is that it's not as exciting as it might look. It's a government meeting saying here's all the people that should be involved in this. Here's what they think. There's no one's ready to say it's aliens. Nobody wants to say it's not this or that, because then they could be wrong. And it's just a tricky subject for U.S. government agencies to discuss, because they all have stuff they don't want other agencies to know about. Some of them have stuff they don't want the public to know about. But of course, by doing nothing, they just feed the mystery. What do I think they are? I think, unfortunately, I have to conclude that they are all either unreported experimental aircraft or weather balloons that went off course or were not reported properly, or weird camera malfunctions or optical illusions. And some of them I don't know what they are, but I can't jump to them being of alien origin just because we don't know what they are. I think a lot of them are weather. Well, look, I mean, I only know about two of these things. This is not really what I do, but ball lightning. Okay, so ball lightning happens in the sky. It happens on the ground. Look at this. I mean, if that was up in the sky and you saw it from a plane, and it obviously didn't respond to a radio signal, and it was outputting its own energy, what the hell what do you think of, very strange looking thing, I imagine, up in the sky. So I think a lot of them are this kind of stuff. There's also, well, now we're getting away from actual photos, but there's also red sprite lightning. Yeah, this stuff. So I can't remember what makes this stuff happen, but I mean, clouds, this stuff, you could imagine seeing that and thinking it's a cylindrical object when it's just light from a weird form of lightning. So, and these are just a few things that I don't know, and I don't know a lot about these weird forms of lightning. So I have to conclude, lacking more evidence, that these are all explainable objects from the Earth, or natural phenomena or things from the Earth that we don't know about yet. So I wish I could say that I have unique evidence. Have I heard of the pill that was allegedly recorded by the Navy? Well, let's see. I have not. Navy pill recording. Oh, of course, we're going to get some actual pills. Maybe you're referring to this. Are you referring to this thing? I mean, it's the Tic Tac. Interesting. Well, it's a big step forward that the U.S. government is even publicly talking about having seen some of this stuff. Let me know. Okay, I'm going to do that. Let's see. Maybe let me know. Almost afraid of what YouTube's going to show me here. Well, I'll look into it, but maybe Lamino Navy. Yeah, I don't know. Again, without. Yeah, I like this. Extraordinary until proven otherwise. That looks like a... Talking about this thing? Who knows? I there were also some weird UFO-looking experimental aircraft that the U.S. and the Soviet Union actually built. The Soviet Union actually tried for a while to make a UFO-shaped thing fly, but it's much harder than they thought. Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. These are very curious-looking objects, but I can't. The nature of this stuff is such that, yeah. Oh, I love when they have the discussion.
So there are a few things done.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love I'd love for that to be an alien spaceship,
What that looks like.
but who knows? It could be. I mean, yeah. Yes, yeah, that's the thing is that there's a lot of it could have easily. I have to, yeah, I want to believe too. I have to conclude though that it was probably some weird optical artifact. Because I mean, then you get into really interesting philosophical questions like if an alien spaceship could get here, why would they just fly? I mean, you start projecting human thinking onto a total unknown. I mean, if an alien spaceship could get here and fly around in our atmosphere, like why would they just do this little ticky tack stuff, pun intended, and hide? I mean, it you then have to reach other even more outlandish conclusions that they would go to that effort to come here and then do nothing, or even more out or even crazier do yeah. I mean, I suppose that makes sense. So I don't know. I keep coming back though to my friends at NASA who I have to believe. Yeah, I mean, I hear you, Colton. I just like I said, there's two or three people I would trust to tell me that such a thing is an alien, and it's just too big of a deal to take anything other than any evidence other than your own eyes. And I'm sure there's plenty of other things like that. Yeah, I mean, if I'm not sure which is more unnerving, that there's aliens, that there's no aliens elsewhere in the universe at all, or that there's aliens that came here and are hiding from us and watching us. I mean, from there you can go as far as you want. So, if there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. I think the big takeaway here is that the U.S. government is even talking about this. For 50 years, these reports were ignored. Or I shouldn't say ignored, were not reported, and there was no acknowledgement that the U.S. took any of this seriously. Then occasional agencies, thank you, once in a while would say things like, oh yeah, we take reports seriously, probably because they don't want to be blamed for aviation incidents if they were to happen. And then, of course, now people shine lasers at aircraft. And so I can imagine all kinds of optical artifacts in aircraft cameras happening because of laser light going into them that maybe the pilot doesn't even see. So it's not going to get any easier. Although there's always sort of an ever increasing surveillance network looking up into the sky. So maybe someday we'll catch something. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what kind of tech is around the corner? We're going to see a lot more drone like platforms now that electric motors are small and cheap and powerful enough. There's going to be electric aircraft. So you're going to have aircraft without a jet profile, without the sound and kind of nearby air disturbance that jet aircraft cause, without the same thermal. It's going to get a lot more confusing before it gets any less confusing. Because once you have quieter electric motor based aircraft that don't even make jet engine sounds, I mean, that's going to just have yet another thing on a PowerPoint that we don't, that we have to rule out. So it's a fascinating subject. I appreciate you two are interested enough to join. And I think I'm going to call it here. I'll certainly do a live about developments in this area. I'd love to even announce someday that, hey, I'm convinced some alien life has been located. I do think that will happen in my lifetime, but I'm guessing it won't happen until the 2030s at earliest, when the next set of equipment gets to Mars. So, have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining.